Eat, Sleep, Boxing, Repeat. I'm delighted to be joined by Elliot for another weekly preview show looking at the boxing for the weekend ahead. We've got a few good shows here. Mainly one from Wembley Arena on Saturday night is Joe Joyce headlines against Christian Hammer. On the undercard, we've got a few decent fights with Jason Cunningham in action and Callum Johnson as well. And then, of course, the Cruiserweight King, Mairis Briedis, is fight in action as well over down under in Australia against an undefeated opponent. So there's some great boxing to look forward to after what was a pretty good weekend there past in Coventry. So firstly, Elliot, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Good weekend, like you say, good weekend of boxing had by all. Enjoyed the Eggington fight. Again, Eggington seems unable to avoid going 12 rounds in a war with no matter who he fights. But it was entertaining. And yeah, obviously the zone card as well. Rodriguez, what a performance. Akhmedliev, what a performance. Yeah, really good weekend to be fair. Late one, but a great one.
Definitely, 100%. I echo what you're saying. Some unbelievable action, especially in Texas, I think. But yeah, anyway, we'll move on to this week. And as I mentioned earlier, the show on Saturday night, the Frank Warren Queensbury promotion show, is headlined by Joe Joyce against Christian Hammer. Yes, Joe Joyce, he hasn't fought in a year now, it'll be almost, when he goes into the ring on Saturday night. But yeah, he's up against Christian Hammer, who I think it's fair to say the vast majority of boxing fans know his name just from the sheer amount of fights he's had against quite top-level opposition, no matter whether he's won or not. But if you're looking at quick rundown of both fighters, you've got Joe Joyce 13-0, 12 of those 13 wins coming by knockout, made his debut in 2017. He's 6'6", 36 years old, fights out of the orthodox stance. And then you look at Christian Hammer, his record's 27-9. He's had 17 of his 27 wins have come by knockout, and of his 9 defeats, 4 have been stoppages. He's 6'2.5", also orthodox, and is 2 years actually younger than Joe Joyce. Because I think everyone still seems to think Joe Joyce is like a young cross so late, but in reality, he's older than almost all of the other heavyweights. But anyway, yeah, I mentioned there Christian Hammer had lost to some top-level guys. These include Frank Sanchez, Tony Yuka, Luis Ortiz, and Alexander Povetkin, who he actually lost to all in points. He didn't get stopped by any of them. However, he did get stopped by Tyson Fury way back before Fury fought Klitschko, and also got stopped by Marius Wack near the start of his career, and also Hughie Fury more recently. And then obviously you're looking at Joe Joyce, who was meant to be fighting Joseph Parker. That fight fell through for one reason or another. But he'd say he's on the verge of a world title shot, and in reality should take Hammer out of there, I think. Personally, what are your thoughts on that, Elliot?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. That was a great introduction, great breakdown. Actually, when you were saying that, I actually, until that point, didn't realise that Hammer was younger than Joyce. In my head, it's just seems like he's been fighting forever. I almost just assumed he'd be like 40 by now. He's actually only 34 is remarkable to me. I agree with you. I think it's one of those fights where the thing is, I'm not got social anxiety. I'm looking down. Paul, you're here. The webcam's here. So basically, what we saw recently with the Boissy fighting over, almost leapfrogging Joyce in a way in the sort of belt they obviously acquired recently. In a weird way, this is kind of a weird fight, I find. I'm sort of sitting there going, like you say, it's like Joyce has got 12 KOs in 13 fights, and known for grinding people down and essentially jabbing them into a KO. So yeah, he should get him out. And to be honest with you, I've been against Joe Joyce on occasions, style-wise, but I'm all aboard the train now. To be honest with you, I'm quite think he deserves to at least have some sort of title shot. I think like a meaningful fight. Like you say, he's 36 now, so really that's got to come within the next couple of years. And obviously, okay, I suppose the belts will be tied up a bit, obviously with AJ and Usyk for a while. Might fracture after that, might not, depending on what happens on that fight. But I'd actually quite like to see Joyce fight either one of those guys. I think he, in a way, deserves that. I know that a lot of casual fans may not be kind of interested in Joe Joyce in that respect, but I think he deserves a go like that. So yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I agree with you. I think Joyce should win this. If he turns up in any sort, as we know he will turn up, I think he'll just grind Hammer down, to be honest. I think he'll get a stoppage as well. So, but yeah, that's my prediction.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I do agree. I think that although Hammer, he has gone the distance with some quite stellar names, I think that the fact that Hughie Fury stopped him in 5 is quite telling, in my opinion, because, you wouldn't have Hughie Fury down as a massive puncher at heavyweight, you'd think Joe Joyce is a far bigger puncher than Hughie Fury is. So I could see it being a mid round stoppage, to be quite honest with you. And now we're going to move on to, we're going to look at 2 undercard fights, I believe. And Elliot, you're going to take us through the first one.
That's right, no, I am. So the first of the undercard fights features Callum Johnson, who's fighting, I'd say these sort of names, man, Igor Mikakalikin. That sound about right? So yeah, I mean, he's obviously fought. I mean, you look at through Callum Johnson's record, and you think, does he have something against kind of Eastern Europeans or maybe a block fight? He used to fight a lot of them. But then, yeah, so he's not been in the ring since 2021. But Callum Johnson's one of those guys where I think 36 years old now, light heavyweight division, and he's up there. You know, this is for WBO global light heavyweight belt, and I think he's ranked 5th, I think, for WBO. So he's kind of still high up there compared to, I suppose, some of the other light heavyweights, British light heavyweights as well, like obviously say like Boatsi and Yarde. But his opponent is actually older than him. He's 37 years old. So you're sitting there going, this is actually almost a fight between 2 guys that potentially maybe on the decline, hopefully not in Callum Johnson's case if you're a British fan. Stats wise, I mean, Callum Johnson's 6 foot, opponent's 6'1", opponent's got a reach of 75.2 to Callum Johnson 72.8. So there's a bit of a reach disadvantage there, but fundamentally you're looking at it and going, I mean, his opponent has lost 3 times and has been stopped twice. And we know that Callum Johnson carries power. 14 KOs in his 20 victories. His only loss being to Opetaia, which is obviously no shame in that at all. So when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I'm hoping, this fight takes place, as Paul said, at Wembley Arena. So I'm hoping that Callum Johnson can kind of reignite a bit of momentum, really, frankly, going into this fight, get a stoppage victory, and then maybe look really to push on to some bigger fights, whether that's domestically, obviously against the size of opponents he could fight, or even on the world stage. I'm not necessarily saying, given the champions they've got in that division, that Callum Johnson will become a flush world champion up there, but I think he deserves almost 1 or 2 more sort of career-defining fights, especially when you think of the show he put up against Opetaia. Obviously, at the time, people thought he got blasted out, but at the same time, who hasn't been blasted out? So, especially what we saw the other weekend with Joe Smith. So yeah, Paul, I want to get your thoughts really on that. Do you think, firstly, how do you see this fight going? And secondly, should Callum Johnson win, as I'm sure we hope that he does, where would you see him going, say, in the next sort of 18 months, really, of a potential career that he has left?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Firstly, from a prediction, yes, I think Callum Johnson will win. And to be quite honest with you, without knowing a huge lot about the opponent, you look at the 3 defeats, and 2 of them obviously are stoppage defeats, albeit one was them against Kovalev, which was actually for the WBO full world title a few years back. And then the other one he lost by stoppage also in the 7th round for the European title. So I'm looking and thinking, yes, Callum Johnson hasn't looked as great in recent fights, and he might well be on the decline. And I hate to say it because it is very cliche, but it's very also true. What's the last thing you lose? The punch. So I think that Callum Johnson is definitely, although he might skill-wise now not be one of the top fighters in the division or even in Britain anymore, and he might well be on the decline, I think he's still definitely one of the hardest punchers in the division. I think we can give him that. So I think he will win, and I think he will win by stoppage. Could be a few hairy moments because the other guy himself, he's a bit bigger and he's a southpaw, so he could prove to be tough to break down. It's always with the southpaw, you're always thinking difficult to sometimes land your shots. It takes you a few rounds to figure them out. But I do think Callum Johnson, he's smart enough to do that, and I do think he will get the stoppage probably mid to late. I don't see it being a blast out early, to be quite honest. He could even, you never know. He could even get wobbled or dropped himself. I know in one of his last few fights, he was fighting a fella that wasn't really well known, and he got majorly wobbled or even went down. I'm not 100% sure, but he definitely got wobbled. I know that. So I'm thinking, yeah, could be. I think he will get to him, but I'm not going to say early. And I think, to answer your second question, I think for Callum Johnson, the time's now or never, really. I think that if he wins this, I know this guy isn't, going to get you straight away a world title shot. Like it's not going to be like, oh yes, I've beaten the gatekeeper to the world level. But at the same time, I think if you're Callum Johnson, you go, I'm the only person that's ever dropped Beterbiev. You know what I mean? I don't call for that rematch, even though I still think that Beterbiev would win that. Call for that rematch, or even, you know, what the Beterbiev Yard fight's meant to be happening, supposedly. Yard and Johnson, obviously both BT fighters now for Frank Warren. If somehow Anthony Yard won that fight, you know, Callum Johnson should be screaming, saying that he deserves the next shot at that. On the other hand, you look at Woody. It looks like Bivol's going down the Buatsi route. Don't think he beat Bivol or Buatsi now. And I think obviously if Buatsi was to beat Bivol, or even both of them, you know, both of them are with Matchroom, Bivol and Buatsi. So I couldn't see the Eddie and Frank fight really working. So I actually don't know what's going to happen with Callum Johnson, to be quite honest. I do want him to get a title shot, because I think the manner in which he had the first title shot, he deserves another one. If that is a rematch or not, I'm not 100% sure. I know he did get stopped in 4 rounds by Beterbiev, but I think he definitely does. I think his best hope is for them to, you know, Beterbiev or Bivol to unify and then move up and the belts get fragmented. But then again, you're thinking that could be another 18 months, 2 years down the line. So
would you have him beating Anthony Yard if they fought after this one?
No, I wouldn't. No. If you had have asked me that before the second Lyndon Arthur fight with Yard, I maybe would have said yes, or it would have been close. But I think Yard looked really good against Lyndon Arthur last time and has made some necessary changes. So I would have to favour Yard in that fight, to be honest. But yeah, I think Callum Johnson will win well this weekend, but he needs to really get on the microphone after and scream for a big fight, because he doesn't have that many years left, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's that perception really with Callum Johnson, almost in a way where he's like very approachable, almost like just a sort of nice guy. It comes down to when I agree with you. I think in a way, almost the age you're at now, you need to be just throwing hands on the mic as well as in the ring, and just trying to literally get anyone, even those British guys. Like, I mean, probably wouldn't happen obviously, but even if you get someone like Callum Smith, get Yard, get Buatsi, any of those guys in the ring for a fight, and just have a sort of couple of big fights essentially after this, and then call it a day. Because otherwise, essentially, the risk really is, I suppose, that you sort of drift into fighting kind of fringe contender guys and losing to someone that no one's really heard of, and it'd be quite sad to see that happen. So hopefully, he gets a big fight after this, and hopefully wins on Saturday. But you're going to now take us to another undercard fight, I believe, taking place this weekend. And over to you again, Paul.
Thanks, Elliot. Yes, again, we're talking about the same card at Wembley Arena, on Saturday night, and this fight is one that really intrigues me, to be quite honest. Jason Cunningham, you would have thought that, you know, he was never going to get to the likes of European level. After losing, I mean, you know, he got beat by Cal Yafai, Reece Bellotti, Jordan Gill, and Michael Conlon. You know, they're all decent enough names, but you're looking at that, and then within the last few years, he's gone on. He's in the form of his life. He's gone on to beating Gamal Yafai, Brad Foster, and Terry LeCourrier in his last 3 fights. He's the current European Super Bantamweight champion, Commonwealth champion, and British champion as well. This weekend, he's fighting Zolani Tete, who a lot of people remember. He was a former world champion, and he was meant to be. He was being billed as like the biggest puncher in that division until he came up against John Riel Casemiro, and that fight against Casemiro was in November 2019, and he's only had 1 fight since then, Tete. So he's had 1 fight in 2.5 years, which is why this fight does intrigue me, in the sense that Tete, you know, before the Casemiro fight, you would have said Tete would have blown Cunningham out of there. But you've got Tete, who hasn't fought for a few years, or only once in 2 or 3 years. And you've got Cunningham, he's just revitalized, who's in the form of his life. So I do think it's a very interesting fight. Obviously, the British title isn't on the line this weekend, as Zolani Tete is African, but the Commonwealth and European titles are on the line. So yeah, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the fight, Elliot? I think it's one of them where I'm interested to see how the bookmakers have it, because right now I'm finding it more difficult to actually say who I think will win.
You know what? I'm actually in agreement with you. I not that you know that it should surprise anyone. I'm completely in agreement with you that I think when you're looking at it, like you say, on paper you're looking at it, and if a few years ago you look at it going, Tete will have way too much for him. You know, you're looking at the guys that he lost to. Obviously, Conlon, you know, respectable. Jordan Gill is lost obviously there as well. There's a couple of, Khalid Jafar, which is not obviously any embarrassment. There's a couple of, I suppose, lesser names that he's lost to as well, on his record as well. And you're sitting there thinking, yeah, he'll have way too much for him. But like you say, like he has rebuilt in a way, and he's been active. Hasn't obviously, with his record, 7 KOs and 31 wins. So I'm looking at it going, if he is going to win, likely to go the distance and beat him on points. Can he outbox Tete? Yeah, I actually think he can. I'm sitting there looking at Tete's 34 now. Like you say, he's been inactive for various reasons. So I'm intrigued by the fight. I actually am intrigued by it, but for some reason I haven't actually looked at the bookies odds on this fight either. But I'm actually leaning towards a Cunningham points victory. And I'm basing I don't know why, it's just some sort of mad impulse, but I think I'm basing it on activity, and also, yeah, mostly it's activity, and just having watched him essentially develop over the last few fights. I think actually he's not necessarily the same fighter that was beaten by those other guys, even though I still think if you stick him in Conor now, Conor will beat him. But it's almost like he's improved to a point where I think he actually can win this fight. So I'm intrigued by it, and I just think, like you say, you come over here undercard, it's at Wembley. Hopefully, a bit of a partisan crowd for him as well. Hopefully can outpoint him. I don't think he's going to stop him. So he'll either get stopped himself, or it'll be a points victory. But I hope it's the latter.
Yeah, I think what you said there, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, to be honest. With looking at the two records, I think it is. If Cunningham is going to win, it's definitely going to be on points. As you mentioned, of his 31 wins, there's 7 stoppages, but then if you're looking at Tete, of his 29 wins, 22 have come via stoppage, which is mental for being down in the lighter weights, a bantam or a super bantamweight. So yeah, I think it is either a Cunningham points victory if he can stay out of the way of Tete's power punches for 36 minutes, or you never know, Tete could blow him away. But that's that's all from the UK shores this weekend. Obviously, we've looked at the main event fight of the weekend in Joe Joyce. We've looked at the 2 undercard fights in Jason Cunningham, Tete, and Callum Johnson as well. And Elliot, I believe you're going to take us through the last fight of the preview, which is our under the radar fight.
No, I'm indeed. So what I'm going to take us down to Australia, to the Gold Coast Convention Centre in Broadbeach, where Mairis Briedis will be defending his IBF cruiserweight title against a local boxer. It's always risky when you say these names. Jai Opetaia, I believe, is what we'll go with. So Briedis, obviously, no one's really a stranger to Briedis, I suppose, in that division. You're looking at a guy who's 28-1, 20 KOs, been a champion for some time now, with his only loss coming against Usyk in 2018, which again is absolutely no embarrassment there at all. Against a guy, Jai Opetaia, who are saying has not fought outside of Australia once. And that was in a card back in 2017. Other than that, he's fought in Australia. Hasn't fought anyone necessarily of the same caliber. Hasn't fought anyone of the same caliber as Briedis. But the intrigue here for me is the fact that Briedis is 37 years old now. His opponent's 26. So the opponent will also be slightly taller. I think he's an inch taller, 2 inches taller, with an inch reach advantage. So it's that sense really of, don't get me wrong, I think Briedis have too much for him, in the sense that you look at the opponents he's faced, essentially since that Usyk win, obviously he's got decent wins against Glowacki, Dorticos, to stand out. The Dorticos one stands out, obviously. And then you're sitting there going that the other guy obviously hasn't been in with, he's obviously got other wins against Marco Huck. The other guy hasn't got sort of other victories on his card of that level. But it's just the age factor where you sort of think with Briedis, can he be got at? I mean, we're talking about it really in the sense that last couple of weeks, I think we were talking on one of the review shows where you sort of saying Peter Baev should go up to cruiserweight and challenge Briedis essentially, as that would be a good route to a world title. So in a way, and you're sort of looking at Oakley sort of getting there and fighting as a unification fight, as being, I suppose, one of the champions that can potentially be got at. I think with the age factor. So for me, even though I don't think this opponent that he's fighting on Saturday will have enough necessarily to beat him, the intrigue there for me is in what has Briedis got left. And I thought I'll be looking at it more from that perspective, really, with the fight after this one that I expect Briedis to have. I mean, he's been doing unusual things like calling out Jake Paul. It's almost like I don't know whether that's a sense of like obviously, it's no risk really for him, obviously, to fight someone like Jake Paul. But you're sitting there going, are you essentially looking to cash? Are you aware that you're at that point of your career where you're sort of on the decline a bit? You're looking to cash, get as much money as physically you can before you leave. That's what it kind of feels to me. But yeah, I'll be looking essentially for wear and tear on Briedis on Saturday. But I suppose, Paul, I'll come to you and say, with the age factor, I mean, do you expect Briedis to come through this? How would you expect it to be a stoppage or points victory? And then also, I suppose post this fight, do you see the age factor sort of being something that comes into it? Where do you see Briedis going after this?
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. I think that you've kind of hit the nail on the head in what I was actually going to say. And the fact about you're looking at Briedis' age, and you're saying, and that was the question I was asking myself as I was doing my research about the Jai Opetaia, I think we'll call him. Yeah, I was like, yes, I think Briedis could potentially at 37 be got at, and with which in a way sounds ridiculous saying that, considering he's given Usyk his toughest fight of his career. It was only a majority decision loss, and one judge had it a draw, the other two had it 115, 113 or something. And he is definitely, I still think it's fair to say that Briedis is the number one in the cruiserweight division. But with the age factor and everything, I do think he can be got at. Can he be got at by this guy? In my opinion, no. I just think that, 21-0 looks good on paper with 17 knockouts. But, looking down his record, he hasn't fought anybody, really. He's 26 years old and he's a southpaw. So he's 2 inches bigger than Briedis. Could that cause problems? Yeah, maybe keep him on the end of his job. But Briedis is too smart for that. He's a southpaw. I think Briedis, that's water off a duck's back to Briedis, to be honest. With the fighters he's fought over the years. I don't know if you'll agree, obviously, but I'm kind of getting Joseph Parker vibes off this guy. Obviously, he's Australian, but I'm getting Joseph Parker vibes in the sense that nobody'd really heard of Joseph Parker outside of New Zealand before he came over and fought Joshua, but he still had the world title. Obviously, he fought Andy Ruiz and stuff, but it was all over in Australia. Then he came over and put up a decent account against Joshua, but lost convincingly. But since then has been more in the headlights in the heavyweight division. I'm thinking about this guy. If he does, I think he will lose against Briedis. But if he does put up a good account of himself, he's throwing his name out into the mix of potential, the next generation of cruiserweights, because he is 11 years younger. So that a loss here isn't the end of the world. He's only 26 years old. He's only 26 years old, so he can come again, and nobody's really expecting him to win, I don't think. So I do think that Briedis can be got at, to answer your question, yes, but not by Jai Opetaia. I think that the fight to make here is, I think if Briedis comes through, if I was Lawrence Okoli, I'd be calling for that fight straight away, to be honest with you. I think that sounds ridiculous saying that, because a couple of years ago we were like, Lawrence Okoli is terrible, but now you're looking at him and you know what, he could be the man that beat Briedis. I think it's fair to say. So I think after this, I just want to see a Briedis-Okoli fight. But again, yeah, it looks good on paper fighting Opetaia, and I know fair play to Briedis is going to Australia to fight in his backyard, but level of opposition not great. I think he will come through, but I do think Briedis potentially next time, if he does fight the likes of Okoli or someone else near the top of the division, I think he could potentially get beaten.
I think it's interesting you said that, well, because Opetaia, I suppose, if you're looking at the IBF rankings, is below both Riek Paul and Willem Smith. So it'll be interesting to see how Briedis sort of shapes up against someone who's kind of around, I suppose, their level, or like where you expect those guys to be, even though they've got 15 fights, the other two, compared to his 21-0. But I was just going to finish on this question. You kind of alluded there that you think Oakley will beat Briedis. So do you think out of those other champions, I suppose, that are down they're in the cruiserweight division, I say down as though it's a small division. So you've obviously got Makabu, Briedis, Oakley, and then Gul Amareri. Who do you still sit Briedis at number one in that division? And who do you think's got the best chance of beating him? I suppose you're going to maybe answer Oakley, but do you reckon Oakley would also beat the other guys as well?
Yeah, I think that you still have to have Briedis as number one, just off the body of work that he's put together and the names he has beaten. And even the way he lost to Usyk, it was super, super close. And then you're looking at Usyk now, who could potentially be 2 fights away from being the undisputed heavyweight champion if he beats Joshua in the rematch, and then maybe fights Fury and wins that as well. But Yeah, I think the Briedis, I think just off the names he has on his resume and the fights he has had, I think you have to have him at number one. But Akoli, I would have at number two. And Akoli of the champions is the only one I could see beating Briedis. And it sounds ridiculous saying this because this is making it out like I think that Akoli is the best cruiserweight in the world, which I suppose if he beat Briedis, he would be. And I'm saying he would beat Briedis. So am I technically saying Akoli is the best cruiserweight in the world? I don't know. But I think Akoli would probably beat Makabu. I think he would beat the other champion as well, the WBA champion. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. But yeah, no. I think the Briedis Akoli fight, I think Briedis is definitely the toughest test against Akoli. But I think just the sheer size of Akoli and the power would definitely be difficult for Briedis to manage.
No, I agree with you. I think should he get through this, I think that's a fight I'd love to see, just like the power that Cody has and his style, and it's just like the levers that he's seen and the range he keeps to keep. I think it'll be an intriguing fight. But yeah, hopefully Briedis come through and hopefully that fight can be made. I'll pass back to you, Paul. Yeah, we've covered obviously a couple of events now. Let's pass back over to you for a final flourish and finish.
Yes, but that's everything for this week. We've obviously looked at the under the radar fight with Briedis, our undercard fights with Jason Cunningham, Tete, and then obviously Colin Johnson as well. The main event this Saturday night from Wembley Arena, we've looked at Joe Joyce against Christian Hammer. So yes, guys, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and just be sure to catch up with all the rest of our content on social media and on YouTube. Greg will have some prediction videos, I'm sure, as well as our betting show we have this week. We'll be attending some weigh-ins and some fights this weekend too. So just tune in for all of that. And thanks very much for watching.
Thank you very much, guys.